Okay, we're going to look at the last two images from Mesopotamia, and we're going to start with the lamassu from the citadel of Sargon II, and this would be considered Assyrian. So when you talk about period, it's Mesopotamian Assyrian. So in 1400 BC, people called the Assyrians rose to dominance, and I mentioned in class that, Mesopotamia was really like a series of people really making a very nice community, and then somebody would conquer them, and then the same thing would happen, and it was kind of like a vicious cycle. So after about 1000 BCE, they began to conquer neighboring regions. So the Assyrians kind of rose in power, and then they started going off and expanding their empire. So these are either called the lamassu or the guardian figures, and they were from gate A of the citadel. So there were several different gates, and kind of like when we looked at the temple of Amun-Ra in Egyptian art, remember how I showed you there were several different gates, so probably the same kind of concept. This was found in the 1840s, and it dates to about 721 to 706 BCE. And what we know about them is that there were several lamassus. They were really considered these guardian figures, and they're huge. They're I think 10, 12 feet tall. And they would have looked huge, but in comparison to the architecture, they would have been actually really, really small. These would have been carved out of monolithic stones, so it would have been one stone that they would have had to move. And these are considered relief carvings, and it basically it's documenting this power, and it's supposed to represent the power of the king. So there are several palaces during the Assyrian empire, and I guess they all would have had statues of this figure, and basically it's a winged bull with the head of a man. And they're supposed to be protecting the palace. So they're supposed to represent the power of the Assyrian king. And in all the images that we've looked at, and there is this type of hierarchical scale and a value of importance in their artwork. There are a lot of stylistic approaches to these sculptures. So you can see the beard, and we've talked about kind of stylized, and even the feathers on the wings are very stylized. So this is a side view, and I have an up close view as well. But let's talk about how they're standing. So if you would come up on the gates, you would only see the front two legs, and that, if it was kind of like their soldier stance almost. And then if you were allowed to pass through, as you would pass through, it was like they were moving. So they actually had 5 legs. So they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And from this angle, you can kind of see perfectly. So they really took into consideration a dual perspective on these animals, which I think is just amazing. They have crowns that have horns on them. You can see here the double horns, and then you've got these series of feathers with the rosettes, meaning power as well, and the feathers are kind of connected back into the wing bulls. And if we get a close-up of the face, they have that nice connected eyebrow, unibrow. Really large earrings, so it's very decorative. So even though it represents power, it's still stylized and decorative, and a beautiful piece of artwork. It's got this extremely complex beard. It's patterning, so that would be your principle. They use a lot of pattern in this sculpture. And even the wings form a decorative pattern. They're incised, and this would have been the low relief and then the high relief. And you can see here the veins in the muscles. So these would have been really, really muscular creatures. So once again, representing power. And you can see even the tail is stylized. So it's basically, its main purpose was to speak of the power of the king and to kind of represent as a guardian figure. So our next image. So the last image that we're going to look at from Mesopotamia is the audience hall, or Apodona, of Darius and Urses from Persepolis. So Persepolis would be your location, and it's actually the Persian Empire. So you've got Mesopotamia, Persian. So 550 to 300 BCE. This particular image that they want you to know is actually the audience hall. So this is the audience hall, and you can see on the map where the Apodona is, the audience hall. And this is in southwest Iran. And the Persian Empire reached from like India to northern Greece, and then from Central Asia to Egypt. So it was a massive territory. And they were actually considered an extremely tolerant empire. And you might not associate Persians with tolerant, but they actually ruled a very multi-ethnic empire. And even in their documentation of their sculpture, you have representations of different cultures, and you have different representation of language and script. So they were very accepting. So they didn't basically conquer these places and then force them to have their culture and adopt their language and writing. The Greek documentation of the Persians is very nasty. So there was not a good association between the Persians and Greece. Most of the surviving literacy that we have from Persepolis was written by the Greeks. So that's why I think the perception of the Persians is probably so bad, because they were truly their sworn enemy. So let's talk about the Apodona. This is a massive columned hall, and it was used for receptions by the king. It had 72 columns and 2 monumental stairways. So you can kind of see this is like one of the stairways here, and there would have been one on the other side. I wanted to show you the nice relief sculpture that would have been on the front of this. And the walls of the stairways were covered with hundreds of figures, and it basically illustrated the subjects of various ethnic backgrounds bringing tribute to the Persian king. This empire would eventually be conquered by Alexander the Great. He respected the Persians and the Persian culture very much, and Alexander the Great made a specific point to properly bury Darius III. So we can look at a little bit more of the sculpture. This would have been like the capital of one of their columns, and we looked at capitals in Egyptian culture, and I think this is considered the 8th wonder of the ancient world. King Darius would have been a glorified ruler, and basically this whole ceremonial complex was to pay tribute to him. The Apodona was actually the size of a city, and it was worked on for 4 generations. And it would have been considered the Apodona, which translates into audience hall. There would have been a lot of lotus flowers on the columns, and the bulls of Persepolis would have been a major symbol in Persian culture. This would have been made out of stone that would have been extremely polished to look like marble. And I wanted to show you, here's like kind of a reconstructed drawing of what it would have looked like. These columns and the capitals are just massive. And he would have put a prayer actually on this wall here that says, "God protect this country from famine and falsehood." So pretty, just king, a religious king, and a very thriving culture until Alexander the Great conquered them.